turn to Revelation chapter 2, and I'm going to read verses 8 on into verse 11 here, and this is about the church of Smyrna. Now, there's going to be a really interesting thing that you're going to hear about this, or maybe not hear. So let me start off by reading to the church in Smyrna. To the angel of the church in Smyrna write, "These are the words of him who is the first and the last, who died and came to life again. I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich. I know the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not be afraid of what you're about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put some of you in prison to test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. Be faithful even to the point of death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes will not be hurt at all by the second death." All right, so here we are in the church of Smyrna, and you can see, again, the Revelation was written to these 7 churches. Again, just a little background on it. It was written as one letter to be read and rotated around. It was going to start in Ephesus. It was going to go around and end up back in Ephesus. And so the churches were going to read about each other, what they have lost, what their issues are. And we get to this church in Smyrna. So let me kind of start off and see if you noticed. It's short. It's the shortest of the letters. But did you notice that there's no rebuke in this one? So Christ doesn't have a problem with this church per se. So it's kind of interesting. So let's kind of look here and see what we've got here. But again, it's the shortest of the 7 letters. It's one of 2 churches that he doesn't directly rebuke, and the other is Philadelphia. So I kind of tied them together. Smyrna is a very proud, it's a very beautiful city. It was located 35 miles north of Ephesus, and it closely aligned with the Roman government. It was known, though, for renowned emperor worship, and so it had a strong Jewish population. And so what you're going to see a lot of in these 7 churches are the fact that there's going to be Roman persecution from the Roman government, and there's going to be Jewish persecution. So Christians were getting it from both sides. And these 2 factors in Smyrna specifically put them in a really bad place. There was a lot of Jewish aggression towards Christian evangelism that was going on. This city, though, had about 200,000 in population, and this was actually the very first city that was given the privilege to build a temple to a Roman emperor, and that was Tiberius. So this was the first city that Tiberius had a temple built to him. So this is the remains of the church of Smyrna in modern day times. And so what was happening during this time was that every year citizens were to burn incense on the altar of the emperor statue and acknowledge that Caesar was Lord. And this was very important to the Romans, that, and this was a conflict that they had, that Caesar was the Lord, right? He had some type of divine power, that he was divinely chosen, and so everybody that was a Roman citizen was required to do this. Temples to many other gods as well. There was just a lot going on, and really, you see that on the outside of this church in Smyrna, and I made the note here that says, what you see is not always what you get. The church in Smyrna was heavily persecuted. It was not well funded. The church in Ephesus was well funded. This church was not well funded, and so there was a lot of barricades. It was very difficult for Christians to get inside of there. It was very hard for Christians to get things. And so, but yet you would think, if you saw the church of Smyrna and you saw that there was a statue and a tribute to Tiberius, and there were so many Jewish people and all these things, that maybe this church wasn't that strong. But that's wrong, because we see here that the mighty church of Ephesus, and again, I got to emphasize this, that Paul and Timothy and John, Christ had a problem with this little church, Smyrna, that we don't know a lot about as far as Paul, Timothy, or John, was doing pretty good in the eyes of Jesus. And so the emphasis, as we kind of talked about last week, each church has an emphasis. The emphasis for Smyrna is loyalty. And so let's kind of start breaking down Scripture here, and you can see this. So we start right out of the gate, and we see that these are the words of Him who is the first and the last, who died and came to life again. And so this is going to be reassurance. So this church that has persecution on all sides, that look like a very impoverished type of church, Jesus is reassuring them that He's the first and the last, and that He died, but He came back to life. And it shows His victory, over death. And as they were facing this widespread martyrdom, He's trying to give them some courage. He's trying to really kind of encourage them to say, even if you're persecuted, you're going to live again, that there's going to be life. And so don't let this outside persecution throw you off. And so he starts off with that in verse 8, and then he gets to verse 9, and he begins to commend them about their suffering and afflictions and poverty. And a lot of times we as Christians, we relate healthy churches, right, to big churches. We see these mega churches, and we see these things, and we think, man, they must be doing something great. And a lot of times we put prosperity, right, with equating that to God working, and that's not the case always. Sometimes we may think that God has left us out to dry, doesn't understand what we're going through. But Christ is saying here in verse 9, you are rich in what matters the most. What's important is what you are very rich in, and that is faith, and that is love. And that's what Christ is commending them for. So this is a church, though, and I kind of think about this as some of these really small churches that may be way out in the country, and we kind of see them and you think, what are they doing? And Philadelphia is really going to give us a good image of this. But, like what are they doing for the advancement of God and that type of thing? Now, we can't equate that 100% because we're not facing any type of persecution or martyrdom yet. But you kind of get the idea. It's a small church. The church of Ephesus was big. It had a lot of people, and this is why Christ starts with them, and He's going to end with them. But Smyrna was small. It wasn't flashy. It didn't have the 10,000-seat arena. It was just strong in faith and love. And so Jesus Christ sees that, and He commends them for that. So he says that I know that your afflictions and your poverty, but you are rich, and he emphasizes that. And he says, I know the slander, and ironically enough, this is the same type of slander that Peter was talking about in 1 Peter chapter 2. And so he says the slander. And he makes this comment. He says, who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. And so this really equates to people that we see a lot of times that say, well, Christians, right? But we call ourselves Christians, but we're not doing the things that Christ is asking us to do. And so the issue is that what Christ is saying about this Jewish synagogue, right? The elected people of the Old Testament, the Jews, it's a synagogue of Satan. And this is huge. This is very, very strong. I mean, this is massive, massive wording that he's saying here. And he's saying that people that are saying you're Jews, that you're not, it's blasphemy. And what he's saying is that because the Jews are persecuting the church, he's saying this is a synagogue of Satan. He is saying every bit of this, the persecution is evil, it's demonic, it is opposite of Jesus Christ, everything possible. And so it's very strong wording. It would be like taking one of our churches and saying, it's a church that preaches for Satan. Right? And so when we read synagogue of Satan, we think, well, that's pretty strong. But if we put it in today's terms and say, one of the Baptist churches here in our association, they've been preaching messages about the Antichrist and all of these things, that would offend us. That's not good. We don't want that to happen. And so Jesus is going after the Jewish people here very, very strongly by calling their worship center a place of evil and demonic activity, and it's all about Satan, and that's very strong. And so he's talking about this, and he continues to bring this up, and he makes the comment following this. He says, do not be afraid in verse 10. He brings up verse 10 here, and he says, do not be afraid of suffering and persecution. Now, the issue that's kind of interesting that Jesus brings this up is really kind of giving them this precursor that there probably is going to be some type of persecution. Something's probably going to happen. So he's telling this little church that is full of faith and full of love to stay strong. Stay strong. There's suffering and persecution, tribulation for their faith. And the tribulation is a result of demonic activity and this blasphemy that has been spoken against God, is what he's saying. And so here we get into verse 10, and he says, do not fear what you're about to suffer. And I think this is really interesting what he says here. And he's saying, don't let it paralyze you. And this is some strong wording for churches, because we can see how a church can get paralyzed very quickly by fear. And I think we have to be very cautious with this. And he says, don't paralyze you with this. Now this is not and I thought about this and maybe making a note here, but this is not a fear of like the virus. So let's go ahead and move that one aside. That's not what we're talking about. This is a persecution. So this would be like our governor saying, if you attend church, you can be fined or you can be put in jail. That's what we're talking about. And unfortunately, I don't know how far that is off, and that's what's scary if we're not careful. And so persecution like this, you must marry same-sex people. Right, that's going to be persecution. If you don't, you will be fined, you will lose this, you will lose that. That's persecution. So where would we stand? And this is what is happening. I don't think we're at that point yet where a firing squad is going to come in and say, if you do congregate, we will just literally come in and start shooting. We're not at that point. But our persecution is going to be money, right, that's going to hit us with fines, maybe jail time. So that's the type of persecution. And that's what this church in Smyrna is facing, but they're facing it even a little bit stronger, that there's a possibility that some can die. And we as Christians, we have to be able to stand. And that's something you really need to think about, is if the government did come in and say, if you attend this church, you will be fined. Well, would you still attend? If you attend the church, you will go to prison or you'll go to jail. Would you be willing to go to jail? So, things to think about. And so he says, do not be afraid. Don't let it paralyze you. And so then he brings out through here, now this is kind of indirectly, but he brings out the parable in Matthew 13 of the weeds. Let me flip over to that really quickly and read this one, just in case you, if you don't remember this one. So this comes from Matthew 13. So this is, Jesus. He's speaking to a large crowd. Matthew 13 verse 24. And it says, Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came, sowed weeds among the wheat, and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where did the weeds come from? An enemy did this, he replied. And the servants asked him, Do you want us to go and pull them up? No, he answered, because while you're pulling the weeds, you may root up the wheat with them. Let both grow together until harvest. And at that time I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds, tie them into bundles to be burned, then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn. So you can kind of see the illusion that's happening here with the parable of the weeds. And this is what Christ is talking about in this parable, that he's going to allow the persecution. He's going to allow the evil to come through. But when it's time to harvest, we will all be harvested together, and the evil will be tied and tossed and burned. The ones that persecuted, the persecutors, and the ones that were faithful will be brought into the barn, which is the equivalent of Christ's kingdom. So we get that parable that comes out of this. And so he keeps talking, and he says people of Satan are about to cause issues. So again, these are evil people. People that's a good equation. So earlier, just a minute ago, we were saying that call themselves Jews but are not Jews. They're a synagogue of Satan. So this would be like Christians, right? And I don't mean to go after our governor, but if you think about a governor, he calls himself Christian, right? And brought in gambling, brought in abortion very quickly. It was on his platform. So that comes in very quickly with him. And so the same type of Christian that said if you do go to church, you can get fined, right? So this is that equation. This is a Christian that calls themselves one, but is not deep down, right? So that's this type of thing. And so these are the type of persecutors that's being talked about here. So the people of Satan are about to cause issues. Now, he does say persecuted for 10 days. That is not a literal 10 days. It just means a time frame. So don't read that as somebody will be persecuted for 10 days. It's just a general time frame there. So we have to be careful with that. But he says for those that are faithful, and here he puts it in, even to the point of death, I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes, and this is not allow suffering to cause unfaithfulness. That's what this is. It's about not letting the suffering of this world, persecution, causing us to be unfaithful. He says, I will give you the crown itself in the physical form of everlasting joy. And he emphasizes, don't just hear, but listen. We see the first reference to the second death. And so this is eternal damnation. And so we will get that later on. But the second death, right? This is that we will all pass away as a physical death will take place. And we will get to this later on in Revelation. But for believers that will be raptured up, we will reunite and live in a physical body for eternity. For the non-believers, the persecutors, they will reunite as well. And unfortunately, they will be tossed into the lake of fire. That is the second death. Now, what's scary about that is that is not it's not a true death, right? For eternity, then they will be tormented. So it's kind of heavy on that one. But overcome, right? And he says it again, overcome, and don't give up. That we cannot give up. Don't let suffering, don't let persecution cause us to become unfaithful. And that's very important for all Christians to understand with that. So, there it is, sorry. There's that one. So be careful with that. So, 6:30. We're doing pretty good. It's time to choose your own adventure, right? Let's get some final thoughts here real quick on the church in Smyrna. It's a very short letter, but it's an important letter. And it's an important letter because those who truly love Jesus, we may have to suffer. And it doesn't mean we all will suffer. And I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that there will be that type of persecution. God absolutely can intervene at any point, and everything will be the way it's supposed to be. But we may have to suffer. And again, there's different levels of suffering. Some may face jail. Some may face fines. Others may get ridiculed. Maybe others may lose a job. I mean, there's all different types of suffering that takes place. But loyalty in the midst of suffering is a demonstration of love. Those who die for Jesus do not have to fear the second death. And we're going to get that from chapter 20, verse 14b, the lake of fire. And that's that very strong term. So that's Smyrna in a nutshell. Now, I don't think we can get through all of Philadelphia tonight. So let me pause for a second with Smyrna. Any thoughts on Smyrna or questions about Smyrna? Anything about them that's curious? Or it's pretty straightforward. It's a pretty straightforward letter, that one. All right. Late Christmas and late New Year's present. Do we want to call it? Do you want to start Philadelphia? That excited? Okay. Let's start Philadelphia. All right. Let's just start and see where we get to. All right. We'll start Philadelphia. So let me kind of jump forward here a little bit. The reason we didn't, Pergamum or Pergamos has a lot to it. Philadelphia is not as in-depth. So that's kind of the next page here. So let's jump over to chapter 3 of Revelation, and it's going to be starting in verse 7. And starting in verse 7, to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, these are the words of him who is holy and true, who holds the key of David. When he opens, what he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open. I know your deeds. See, I've placed before you an open door that no one can shut. I know that you have little strength, yet you have kept my word and not have denied my name. I will make those who are a synagogue of Satan, who claim to be Jews, though they are not, but are liars, I will make them come and fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you. Since you have kept my command to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come upon the whole world to test those who live on the earth. I am coming soon. Hold on to what you have so that no one will take your crown. Him who overcomes, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never again will he leave it. I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which is coming down out of the heaven from my God. And I will also write on him my new name. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So a lot of neat imagery there. So Philadelphia, again, we'll see how far we get on that one. We may be able to finish it next week, and then we'll jump back to Pergamum. But so it's the sixth church. It's going to relate to Smyrna in quite a few ways here. So this is what the church, the remains of the church, looks like, kind of standing from the back. But I want you to notice these are two big pillars. And these pillars are it's really interesting how this all plays out. So just keep these two pillars in the back of your mind. But this would be like, this picture is like we're standing between the two pillars looking out. So these are two pillars of the church of Philadelphia that's left. All right. So the name, we know about Philadelphia because we have a Philadelphia in America. And it comes from the Greek word phileo or phila. And that just means brotherly love is what that is, a form of love. Delphia is the Greek word for city. So city of brotherly love is where it comes from. And it's the other one that did not receive any specific criticism with Smyrna. But this church is a little bit different. This church is small and it is struggling. This is what we would equate to what we're thinking of some of the smaller, very, very rural churches that are barely hanging on and that will probably close in the next year or two. This is a very struggling little church. But it's situated in a big city, a very important city. This city is very important let me back up for a second. There's a lot of trade routes that come in and out of Philadelphia. So to the east, there's a lot of trade routes. So this is a very important city. It was a gateway city to Asia Minor, so a lot of transportation roads would come in there. And it had a cult. Believe it or not, it had a cult. And Dionysus was the name of the god, and there was a goddess, and she was the goddess of wine that was very big there. So, and so the congregation, once again, was being persecuted by Jews and by the Greek and Roman kind of cult thinking. So we kind of get into this here, and so verse 7, we get the same thing, introduction. The author is going to identify himself in the same way. And so Jesus says he's holy, and he's true, This is going to be used again in chapter 6. And this is a great way to describe God. The affirmation of the deity of Christ. Holy just means he's separate, that he is separate from sin. And that true means he's reliable. So Jesus Christ is separated from sin. It's like we talked about this morning. The Word of Christ, there's no sin, there's no evil, there's no darkness in Christ, in the Word of Christ. And so he is holy and he is true, and that just means that he's reliable, that he's always there. And I think it's interesting when we think about holy. We talked a little bit about this in our Sunday school class last week. Even evil, the demons, they admit that Jesus Christ is holy. Right, and that's very important to think about, because evil knows who Jesus Christ is and how holy he is. John 14:6, we know that he is the truth. I am the way, I am the truth. So we know that. And so we get it started off here, and then it says, who holds the key of David. Now this is from Isaiah 22:22, which literally says, I will place on his shoulder the key to the house of David. What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open. So I thought that's a neat reference there. So it's kind of a cool thing there. And so we're getting this David Davidic type of Messiah that has the keys to the kingdom and no one else has. And we also get a little bit of the Old Testament here. Where it's no one can shut, no one can open, right? And so we get to Noah, and what was the importance thing of Noah and the ark? It is spelled correctly on the board, not on your handouts, so I apologize. This is what happens when you type fast and you don't read the red squiggly lines. What did God do on the ark? Close the door, right? He closed the door. And could anybody open the door? No. Can anybody close the door? No. It's a God thing. So there's a lot of neat references here. And so he's talking about David. We're going back to Isaiah. What's the importance of Isaiah? Isaiah is considered the fifth gospel. Isaiah is all about Jesus Christ. So Jesus is talking about and reading these things. And so he's making this analogy to this little poor church that is struggling, that I'm opening a door and there's nothing that anyone's going to be able to do to close it. It's in my hands. You just trust. And so verses 8 through 11, he begins to commend them. He gives them opportunities. And so he starts off, he says, I know your deeds. And this is an important line right here. He says, I know your deeds. And it's the end of a sentence. And why is that? And that goes back to Christ in the lampstands and Christ knowing his churches, right? That he walks among the lampstands and he knows them. So he knows what they have done. He knows the good things that the churches do, and he knows the bad things the churches do. And we talked about this a little bit last week when he says, I hold the 7 stars in my hands, which is we equate that to leadership. I know what good leaders do, and I know what bad leaders do. And so it's so important. And this is, we kind of made this comment last week, I think it was, that as a pastor and as people that are ordained that lead churches, we are called to a higher standard, right? And we're called to make difficult decisions at times. But isn't it more important to follow what Jesus Christ says? Because what? He knows this church. And he knows the leadership of this church. And we're to follow what Jesus says. And that's plain and simple. So he knows this. So that's a phrase itself. I know your deeds. And then he says, the reason for the door, the open door, is because you have little. Now there's some different interpretations of what he's saying here. But so you've kept my word. You've not denied my name. And we learn some things here. Jesus knows them. He opens a door for them. And so what is this door that he's opening? Well, this is a door for them to witness, maybe a door for them to evangelize, to love others, to go out to do different things. But it's really interesting. There it is. Okay. And so it's really interesting to put this in play. And how important this is, because he's going to make a stark contrast here. So here's a major city that's got major trade routes. So this would be like, think about this being like a San Diego that's got a major port, a Miami, a New Orleans, New York City that's got these ports where ships and things are coming in and out. There's a lot of commerce. There's a lot of things happening. And you take a teeny tiny church, take one of the, I know that, some of our churches in the community that are very small with very small congregations. Take that church, plant it inside of San Diego or New York City, Miami, New Orleans, put it in the middle of that. They don't have a lot. They're not wealthy. They're struggling. But the contrast that Jesus is making here is this, is that it doesn't matter about worldly things, right? It doesn't matter that you're not a 10,000 seat arena. What matters is that I'm in control and that you have trusted me. And because you have trusted me, and this is Jesus, right? Because you've trusted Jesus, I'm going to open a door for you in this major city. And the city itself won't be able to close you. And that's what's so neat about this. And so he's telling this teeny tiny church that has stayed faithful to him in this major city, don't fret, just trust what I'm saying. And so there's some different people that have written different things about he opened the door. They had little power, their obedience to Christ, faithfulness, they haven't denied his name. And again, so what does the door represent? Some think eternal kingdom. Small at church, few in number, not really much going for them, so doors open. Maybe other thinks it's an evangelistic opportunity that even though they're small, that God is still in control with this. But what I wanted to highlight about the door being open is that we see this in the New Testament quite a bit. And there's a lot of great opportunity about the doors being opened for Christians and for the church. And so I put some scripture there for you that you can look up. But all of these reference this idea that God is going to continue to open doors for the church that's faithful to Him. And, I think this is such a great church for us to think about, and I'll kind of reference this at the end, but again, I want you to just get this image in your head. The major city, major trade city in the United States, and take the smallest church that you can think of that's barely operating, and plug them right in the heart. And for Jesus Christ to say that you have been faithful. Because if you think about how easy it would have been for them to just give up, to give in, to say, well, if we do this, maybe we can get more money. If we change our beliefs, more people may show up, these types of things. But they didn't. They held true. And Christ says, because of that, I'm going to open a door. So it could be the eternal kingdom. It could be evangelistic opportunities. We can ask Jesus that question one day. But Jesus says in John 10, if you remember John, he talks about the door. The door says that twice. And just again, it's the way that men can come to God. And so Philadelphia is very small in numbers. The church itself is very small. It's overwhelmed by opposition. And so let me kind of get back to speed here. So here we go. But we see in verse 9, if you want to go with me in verse 9, he says, I will make those who are a synagogue of Satan. So there it is again. This is the tie-in to Smyrna. So again, he's going after people that are calling themselves to be Jewish, that are not Jewish, that have blasphemed God's name and doing all of this evil stuff. We see this 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 talks about this. Not every synagogue in this way, but the ones that were persecuting the church. And he says that I'm going to make them fall down at your feet. And, this morning we made the reference that for those that stay true and sincere and work hard at repentance and identifying the wrongs in their life and doing these things, that what a glorious day that's going to be when we get to reach up and grab Christ's hand. I'm excited about that and pulling us up, and it's going to be the non-believers and the people that have crucified Christ and the people that have persecuted the church that we will literally be stepping on as we go up. And it's the same concept here that he's saying in 9 part B, where he says everybody's going to fall at your feet, meaning that, and this is a thing from Isaiah 49:23, but just meaning that Jesus is in charge, right? That Jesus is the conqueror. Jesus controls all of this stuff. And I hope that we're all in the same boats, thinking that I want to be the one stepping on the backs of these people rather than the one Jesus is pushing down, right? If you're confused about that, you don't want to be the person Jesus is pushing down, okay? Just I don't want you to go away thinking, which one do I want to be? You want to be the one stepping, not being pushed. So in Isaiah 49, kings will be your foster fathers, and the queens your nursing mothers. They will bow down before you with their faces to the ground. They will lick the dust at your feet. Then you will know that I am the Lord. Those who hope in me will not be disappointed. And man, that's awesome. Isaiah is a great book. If you've never read it, it gets me fired up quite a bit. And so anyway, verse 9, he talks about that. And again, we're not going to beat that, but the same concept from Smyrna. And he calls them here at the end, or in the middle of verse 9, he calls them liars. He just flat out says they're liars. And I will make them fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you. So pretty neat thing. We get in verse 10. And in verse 10, since you have kept my command to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come upon the whole world to test those who live on the earth. Now, there's a lot here to unpack. So he starts off and he says, since you have been faithful to me, I'm going to be faithful to you, to your church. And to endure patiently, and enduring patiently, remember now, this is a big concept because they're facing a lot, and they've been facing a lot for a long time. So they have endured patiently for years and years and years and years, meaning that as the world has hit them with things time and time and time again, they have stood firm in their beliefs and kept Christ first. And so he says, I'm also going to keep you from the hour of trial. And something that is important about this with this persecution too is that they didn't become less excited to follow God. And I think that's a big point for churches today, is that excitement. You know, we said this morning, we said it last week, that if we have 250 people on the roster, we need 250 people serving, that we need to all be excited for Jesus Christ. And we kind of talked about it last week a little bit in the sense that, you know, a lot of churches, when you get down to it, you know, you get 20 or 25 people maybe that serve, and it's hard on those 20 to 25 people, and it wears these people down. And so that's why the church of Ephesus was hit so hard, that says if you're a member of this church, be a member of the church. Be excited. And so that's what's so neat about the Church of Philadelphia, is that they were a small church. They didn't have 250 people on the roster that they could lean on. You know, I'm going to throw 20, 25 people maybe. But all 20, 25 of these people, don't quote me on that number, but it was a small number, but they never lost faith, and they were excited. And I think what a great motivator for us as a church, that in the face of persecution, we still are excited about Jesus Christ. And so he commends them for this. And he says here what so many of us think of Revelation is. And he says the hour of trial. And this is a really neat statement that is made here. And so what he's talking about is it's keeping them through the hour of testing. We see this in John 17:15. And this could be a pre-tribulation rapture type of way. So we will get to the rapture, in which, and there's some different views on the rapture, but the idea of the rapture is that when Christ returns, when the process begins, Christians will be raptured up They will be taken up. We get this idea from 1 Thessalonians, but will be brought up into the air. And he talks about the dead going first. So the ones that have passed will go first. The bodies will come out of the graves and they will meet. Then the Christians will go with them. And then we will ascend back down with ready to go, right? The new heaven and the new earth and so forth and so on. So this is kind of interesting what he says here. It's going to keep you from the hour of trial that's going to come up on the whole world to test those who live on the earth. So the thought is that the ones that are left. Now what's interesting about this, and we, again, we don't have time to get into that. We will come to this point in Revelation, but it's some different beliefs on how the return of Christ is going to look. Some people think that once the rapture happens, and so the Christians are taken first, the ones that are left on the earth are the ones that are going to have to go through the trials. What is it? What's the book series that talks about the preachers left Behind, right? There's the book series about Left Behind. Matter of fact, I talked to a person about this. I had a former student of mine call me this week and was having questions about this themselves. Now, what's curious about this idea, and I'll advocate which way I go when we get to that part. I don't want to lay my cards down too quick. But what's interesting about this is when you read Scripture. And what's scary about this, when you read the rest of Revelation, the ones that are left are the ones that will not repent. They get tons and tons of opportunities because the seals and the trumpets are partial judgments. They're not full judgments, meaning that only parts of the population will be taken out. It's when the bowls start getting poured out is when the bowls of wrath of God will start, and those are the full judgments. But what's really scary, and I don't like to use the word interesting here, but what is really scary is that the people that are left on the earth, instead of repenting, they get mad. And they get more mad. And the more that God allows things to happen and the more the angels are active, they get even more mad. Now, that's not to say, and so you have to be cautious with this, that's not to say that's going to be everybody. But John is witnessing and recording those types of people. So it doesn't mean that the preacher from Left Behind is going to get mad at God. Maybe he does see. But what happens is that people start seeing this, and instead of repenting, they turn angry. And the more that God allows the angels to pour out and to happen, the more angry they get. And I think how scary that is and how sad that is. And I think there's an urgency to this. And I think there's a reason that John doesn't record that, is because we need to make sure that we're locked in now. We need to make sure that our family and our friends are locked in now, that our co-workers are locked in now. We don't want, and I don't know about you, now this is just Chris's commentary 2.0 here, but I don't want to roll the dice. I don't want to be left on earth thinking that, and watching these things happen, thinking I need to do something. I would really like to be standing beside an angel or standing in the sky looking down. You have the freedom to choose which route you like, but I would hope that you would want that same thought process. And so, again, there's a lot to this one, and we'll unpack this when we get to this section. But the other thing I want you to think about here, and we'll kind of stop on this as we don't have much, but we'll stop here and pick this back up next week. He says the hour of trial. And what I want you to take away from this is that when this happens, it's going to go very fast. This is not going to be a long event. When trumpets sound and skies start to part, it's going to go fast, and it's going to move very, very fast. Scripture says in the blinking, the twinkle of an eye, right? And how quick is that? It's going to take place like that. And so part of Revelation is to have an urgency, not to be scared into submission, but to have an understanding that the King of peace and love is going to return, and he's going to return very quickly. And when that happens, when that process begins, I don't want to say it's too late, but I just wouldn't think you would want to roll the dice. And so I hope that as we study these churches and as we really get into the meat and potatoes of Revelation, where we're going to see creatures and we're going to see Antichrist and beasts coming out of the sea and out of the earth, it's going to get very scary because the imagery is very strong. But it should make us want the beauty of Christ even more and speed His coming, and that we're locked in and we're safe and we're secure. And you know, I think it's very, very fitting in the sense, well, and just kind of playing off what you were talking about and how sad that is in nursing homes. I mean, that breaks my heart to think about that. And so, what happened? Why couldn't the gospel get there quicker? You know, why did we? What happened? Why did we not do this and do that so quick? And that's what Revelation reminds us of: is that Christ will come, and when it starts, it starts. There's no time out. There's no pause. There's no let me try this again. That's it. And I think, man, the urgency for this, that we've got to get the gospel out, right? That's our job, is to lock ourselves in, be excited for Christ, be excited for His church, take this church and go and talk to others and bring people to the saving grace of Jesus. So anyway, you can kind of read the rest of that. I will touch on verses 11 through 13 next week. It's not too heavy there, but we'll do that and then get back into Pergamos next week. But that's the thought. And again, just real quick to hit this last point, do notice that he says whole earth, the world. So everything will be under the influence of this. So I'm going to stop there for tonight, and we can stop the recording. And let me get some thoughts, questions